I've said this before, but I think context is very important. If not the most important thing to consider when we're having conversations with each other. I think it's more or less unfair to expect people to dance around the words or not use certain words when you understand what they're trying to say or trying to do, because that's what really matters at the end of the day. I get pretty annoyed when people go out of their way to become offended at things that they already knew weren't designed to be offensive. That said, for your own benefit and your own purposes, you may decide to change the way you talk about things. Because at the same time, while people often get offended for what I think are silly reasons, I still think you should try to avoid offending people in your day-to-day life. Like, try not to make people unhappy. It's simple. I think that's a pretty good way to live. But really, not even just to avoid pissing people off. I think there are just ways to talk about things that are actually more accurate and more precise, and I value accuracy and precision, and maybe you do too. Like, on this channel, I've made a lot of videos about romantic relationships, and I've become very conscious of the fact that I've focused on heterosexual relationships. Now, this kind of makes sense because I'm heterosexual, and it would be hard for me to speak from the point of view of someone who isn't heterosexual. But I've decided that I don't want my videos or my everyday speech to imply that heterosexual relationships are the only kind of relationships there are, or that somehow heterosexual relationships are normal and other kinds of relationships are abnormal. And like I said before, if you're being fair and appreciating the context of what I've said, you probably already know that I don't think those things. And I don't think it would be fair for you to assume that I did think those things. But still, even so, for me personally, I'm still interested in speaking accurately and inclusively. Now, one strategy, of course, is to just look at the averages. For example, there are way more right-handed people in the world than left-handed people. And this has led to most things in the world being designed to be comfortable and convenient for right-handed people. And you may not think that's a problem. You could certainly make an argument in favor of that approach. And you can use the same approach in your speech. Like, I would say it's generally non-controversial to say men have penises, because the vast majority of people who identify as men have penises, presumably. But what I'm saying is maybe it might be useful for us for accuracy's sake, for respect's sake, and maybe even for the overall betterment of society in terms of knowledge and experience, to not marginalize groups of people in our speech. And of course, as always, we have to be reasonable with it. Like, some things are abnormal. Like, if you were born without a nose, I would consider that abnormal. And I wouldn't be quite ready to change my speech to be inclusive to people without noses. At the same time, it is useful to remember that there are people with disabilities. Like everything else, it's not black and white. There is nuance. But maybe it's something to think about. You know, I haven't even figured it all out myself. It's just something that I've been pondering. And by the way, maybe you think that people who identify as men that don't have penises is abnormal. And that's kind of a whole different conversation, but I do want to suggest that just because something is not common doesn't mean that it's abnormal. And keep in mind, I don't mean like hashtag not all blank. I think it should be obvious to everyone who's not a child that when you make a generalization like this, you don't literally mean all blank are blank. I really think we should be able to have conversations without making that disclaimer. But in many cases, I think precision and inclusiveness is useful, and marginalization is not ideal. Like this video that went viral a couple years ago.
You got to thank the Lord, right?
Yeah.
Do you thank the Lord for that split-second decision?
I'm actually an atheist.
Oh, you are? All right, don't thank the Lord.
Wolf Blitzer was making the frankly statistically probable assumption that the woman was a Christian or some kind of theist. But had he chosen words that reflected inclusiveness, he could have avoided that awkward situation. And that's kind of a funny example, but hopefully you understand what I'm getting at here. Now, I don't want to bombard you with example after example because there's so many of them. It's just something that I've been thinking about, and I thought maybe you might want to think about it too. That's just me though. But I want to know what you think. Drop a comment. I want to go ahead and give a shout out to all of the new subscribers. How you doing? If you like the video, please press the thumbs up button and subscribe if you like my hair. The way that we dread awkwardness and the painstaking measures we take to avoid it, you think that awkwardness is like the worst thing ever. But here's a secret. Everyone is awkward. I mean, maybe there are some people that can gracefully face any social situation without that feeling. But if those people do exist, they make up the vast minority of human beings.